You think family drama is intense? Wait until you hear about the Saturday afternoon that flipped my life upside down. Started as a quiet day at home, just me and my tea. But then he walked in. My nephew, looking way too confident, way too grown up. What he said, what he did next. Let's just say it left me questioning everything I thought I knew about boundaries, relationships, and myself. Trust me, this story is not what you expect, and it only gets crazier from here. Are you ready for this? It was supposed to be just another quiet Saturday. Emma had the house to herself for the first time in weeks. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting the living room with a serene glow. She curled up on the couch with a warm cup of tea, finally enjoying the rare silence. Her husband, Jake, was out with friends, and there was no one to bother her. But then the door swung open. "Emma, you here?" called a familiar voice. Her stomach dropped. She had completely forgotten. Nate, her 23-year-old nephew, had said he might stop by. He stepped into the living room, all confidence and ease, a far cry from the awkward teenager Emma had once known. His dark hair was slightly tousled, his piercing green eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. He smiled, that boyish charm lingering on his face, but there was something else beneath it, something heavier. "Hey," he said, plopping down on the couch beside her. Emma tried to keep her voice steady. "I did not hear you come in. How are you?" "Better now," he replied, his gaze lingering a moment too long. Something about the way he looked at her made her chest tighten. This was not the Nate she remembered. He seemed older, more confident, as if he had crossed some invisible line without her noticing. He leaned back, stretching an arm over the couch. The faint tension in the air seemed to thrum louder with every passing second. "I figured we could hang out for a bit," he said casually, but the way his eyes studied her face betrayed a deeper motive. Emma shifted, her fingers nervously brushing against the soft throw pillow in her lap. "Sure. What do you want to do?" Nate shrugged. "Anything is fine. I just wanted to see you." His words felt heavier than they should. She tried to remind herself that he was just her nephew, but there was an edge in his tone, a confidence in the way he spoke, that made her heart race for reasons she did not want to examine. As they sat there, side by side, Emma could not shake the feeling that this visit was about more than a casual hangout. And for the first time, she wondered what exactly Nate was trying to say without saying it. The line between them, so clear before, now seemed blurred. Emma tried to shake off the unease. She grabbed the remote, forcing a smile as she turned on the television. "Let us watch something," she said, hoping the noise would fill the growing silence. Nate leaned closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "Sure," he said. "You pick." Her fingers fumbled with the remote, her thoughts racing. She scrolled aimlessly through the options, barely registering the titles. Finally, she landed on a random action movie and hit play, hoping it would be distracting enough to push back the strange tension. As the movie played, Nate reached for a bowl of popcorn she had on the table. Each time his arm brushed against hers, Emma felt a jolt, like static electricity. It was ridiculous, she told herself, to feel so rattled by a simple touch. But then, during a quiet moment in the film, Nate broke the silence. "Aunt Emma, can I ask you something?" Her heart skipped a beat. She turned to look at him, trying to steady her breathing. "What is it? Have you ever felt like you wanted to break the rules? Do something you are not supposed to?" His voice was low, almost a whisper, and there was something intense in his eyes that made her stomach twist. Emma felt her throat tighten. She could barely get the words out. "Nate, what do you mean?" He leaned closer, his eyes locked on hers. "I mean, sometimes I think about things I know I should not. Things that are wrong. But I cannot help it." She tried to laugh it off, though her voice sounded shaky. "Everyone has those moments. It is human nature." "Yeah," he said, his tone turning more serious. "But sometimes, I think about what would happen if I just went for it. If I stopped caring about the consequences." Emma's pulse was pounding. The look in his eyes, the way his voice dropped, it all felt too intimate, too personal. She shifted uncomfortably, trying to put some distance between them. "Nate," she said, her voice firmer now. "You are my nephew. You cannot think that way. It is not right." He did not look away. Instead, he leaned even closer, his voice barely audible. "But what if it feels right?" Emma's breath caught in her throat. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The weight of his words, the intensity of his gaze, left her frozen. For the first time, she realized she might not be the one in control of this situation. Emma stood abruptly, the tension unbearable. She needed space, distance, air. "I am going to grab something from the kitchen," she said quickly, hoping to steady herself. Nate's eyes followed her as she walked away, his gaze heavy and unrelenting. "Want some help?" he called out, his voice casual, but the undertones sent a shiver through her. "No, I am fine," she replied, trying to sound breezy. She busied herself rummaging through the fridge, her hands trembling. She could not think straight with him so close, his words echoing in her mind. A moment later, she heard his footsteps behind her. She turned sharply, startled to find him standing in the doorway. "You sure you are okay?" he asked, stepping into the small kitchen. "I said I am fine," she insisted, but her voice betrayed her nerves. He moved closer, his expression serious. "Emma, you are acting like I did something wrong." Her back pressed against the counter, and she felt trapped. "Nate, you are my nephew. This is not a conversation we should be having." "Why not?" His voice was calm, steady. "Because of a title? That does not change how I feel. Or how you feel." She froze, her breath catching. "What are you talking about?" "You know what I am talking about." He was inches away now, his presence overwhelming. "I see the way you look at me. You feel it too." Her cheeks burned. She tried to push past him, but he stepped into her path. "Do not do this, Nate," she pleaded, her voice breaking. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I am not trying to make you uncomfortable, Emma. I feel like there is something between us. Something real. And I cannot keep pretending it is not there." Emma shook her head, her voice trembling. "This is wrong. You need to leave." For a moment she thought he might argue, but instead he stepped back, his eyes searching hers. "If that is what you really want," he said quietly, "I will go. But I think you are lying to yourself." His words hung in the air as he walked out, leaving Emma alone in the kitchen. Her heart was racing, her thoughts a chaotic swirl. She had no idea what had just happened, but one thing was clear. The boundaries between them had been shattered, and nothing would ever be the same. Emma stayed in the kitchen for what felt like hours, though it was only minutes. She steadied herself against the counter, her mind racing. What had just happened? And why had part of her not pushed harder to stop it? She thought Nate had left, but as she finally summoned the courage to step back into the living room, there he was, sitting on the couch, his phone in his hand, as if nothing had happened. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "I thought you were leaving," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. "I was," he replied, standing up slowly. "But then I thought maybe I should wait. Maybe I should give you a chance to say what you are really thinking." "Nate," she started, her voice firm, though her resolve felt like it was crumbling. This cannot happen." "Why not?" he said, stepping closer, his tone calm, deliberate. "Tell me why, Emma. Is it because you really believe it is wrong, or because you are scared of what it means?" Her breath hitched, her chest tightening. "You are making this into something it is not," she said, though the words felt weak even as she spoke them. "I am not making anything," he replied, his voice growing softer. "This is already here. We both know it. You just will not admit it." He stopped just short of her, his gaze locking onto hers. "You feel it, do you not? That pull. That connection." Emma wanted to deny it. She wanted to say something, anything that would shut this down and send him away. But the intensity of his presence, the way his words struck a chord she had been trying to ignore, left her defenseless. She stepped back, shaking her head. "Nate, stop. This is not. I cannot." But he followed her, his voice quiet but insistent. I know this is not easy. I know it scares you. Scares me too. But that does not make it any less real. Her back hit the wall and she felt cornered. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers. It was a small gesture, but it sent a wave of heat through her, and she hated herself for feeling it. This is not about me, she said, her voice breaking. This is about you being confused. You do not know what you want. I know exactly what I want, he said, his voice steady. And I think you do too. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of their breathing. Emma's mind raced, torn between everything she knew was right and the magnetic pull she could no longer deny. And then, without warning, she pushed past him, grabbing her coat from the hook near the door. I need to go, she said, her voice shaking. Emma, wait, Nate called after her. But she did not stop. She threw open the door and stepped out into the cold night air, her heart pounding. She had crossed a line, or maybe he had, but one thing was certain. There was no going back now. Emma walked briskly down the street, the chill of the night cutting through her thin coat. Her thoughts were a chaotic mess. How had things escalated so quickly? She had always been in control, the responsible one, the adult in the room. But now, she felt like she was spiraling, the boundaries of her life collapsing around her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she knew who it was before even looking. She ignored it, her footsteps quickening. She needed space, clarity, anything to pull herself out of this whirlwind. But then, just as she turned the corner, a familiar voice called out behind her. Emma, stop! She froze, her breath visible in the cold air. She turned slowly, and there was Nate, jogging toward her. His face was flushed from the cold and the chase, but his eyes burned with determination. What are you doing? She demanded, her voice a mix of anger and desperation. I could not let you leave like that, he said, stopping just a few feet away. Not after everything. Everything? She shot back, her voice rising. What are you even talking about? There is nothing to talk about. Nate, this is over. It has to be. He took a step closer, his hands raised as if to calm her. You cannot just walk away from this. You feel it too. I know you do. Do not tell me what I feel, she snapped, her voice cracking. You do not understand what this means, what this could do. I understand more than you think, he said, his voice soft but unrelenting. And I am not scared of it. Are you? Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to yell at him, to push him away, but the vulnerability in his voice, the raw honesty in his eyes, left her disarmed. This is wrong, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You know it is. Maybe, he admitted, stepping even closer. But it does not change what I feel. What we both feel. She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. We cannot do this, Nate. It will destroy everything. It does not have to, he said, his voice breaking slightly. We could, I do not know, figure it out. Together. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Emma looked at him, her emotions a tangled mess of fear, longing, and guilt. For a moment, she thought about what it would mean to take that step, to give in to the pull that had been growing between them. But then reality came crashing back. This ends now, she said firmly, wiping a tear from her cheek. You need to let this go, Nate. You need to move on. Emma. No, she interrupted, her voice shaking but resolute. I am your aunt. This can never happen. I will not let it. Nate's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. For the first time, he looked vulnerable, lost. I thought. I know, she said softly, her own heart breaking as she spoke. But it has to stop here. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her steps slow but deliberate. She did not look back, even as she heard him call her name one last time. As she disappeared into the night, Emma felt the weight of what had just happened settle over her. The line had been crossed, the damage done, and there was no going back. But at least she had finally stopped it.